a Wikividi Documentaries production. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy. Barbados. Barbados is an island country in the Lesser Antilles, in the Caribbean region of North America. It is 34 kilometers in length and up to 23 kilometers in width, covering an area of around 432. It is situated in the western area of the North Atlantic and around 100 east of the Windward Islands and the Caribbean Sea. Therein, it is about around 168 east of the islands of St. Vincent and the Grenadines and around 400 northeast of Trinidad and Tobago. Barbados is outside the principal Atlantic hurricane belt. Its capital and largest city is Bridgetown, inhabited by Kalinago people since the 13th century, and prior to that by other Amerindians. Barbados was visited by Spanish navigators in the late 15th century and claimed for the Spanish crown. It first appeared in a Spanish map in 1511. The Portuguese visited the island in 1536, but they left it unclaimed, with their only remnants being an introduction of wild hogs for a good supply of meat whenever the island was visited. An English ship, the Olive Blossom, arrived in Barbados in 1625. Its men took possession of it in the name of King James I. In 1627, the first permanent settlers arrived from England, and it became an English and later British colony. As a wealthy sugar colony, it became an English center of the African slave trade until that trade was outlawed in 1807, with final emancipation of slaves in Barbados occurring over a period of years from 1833. In 1966, Barbados became an independent state and Commonwealth realm with the British monarch as hereditary head of state. It has a population of people, predominantly of African descent. Despite being classified as an Atlantic island, Barbados is considered to be a part of the Caribbean, where it is ranked as a leading tourist destination. 40% of the tourists come from the UK, with the US and Canada making up the next large groups of visitors to the island. In 2016, Transparency International's Corruption Perceptions Index ranked Barbados 6th in the Americas after Canada, the United States, Uruguay, Chile, and the Bahamas. Also in 2016, Barbados was celebrated its 50th golden anniversary of independence. Etymology. The name Barbados is either the Portuguese word Os Barbados or the Spanish equivalent Los Barbados, both meaning the bearded ones. It is unclear whether bearded refers to the long, hanging roots of the bearded fig tree, indigenous to the island, or to the allegedly bearded Caribs once inhabiting the island, or, more fancifully, to a visual impression of a beard formed by the sea foam that sprays over the outlying reefs. In 1519, a map produced by the Genoese mapmaker Visconti Maggiolo showed and named Barbados in its correct position. Furthermore, the island of Barbuda in the Leewards is very similar in name, and was once named Las Barbudas by the Spanish. It is uncertain which European nation arrived first in Barbados. One lesser-known source points to earlier revealed works predating contemporary sources indicating it could have been the Spanish. Many if not most believe the Portuguese, en route to Brazil, were the first Europeans to come upon the island. The original name for Barbados in the pre-Columbian era was a Kiruga name according to accounts by descendants of the indigenous Arawakan-speaking tribes in other regional areas, with possible translations including Red Land with White Teeth, Redstone Island with teeth outside, or simply, teeth. Colloquially, Barbadians refer to their home island as Bim, or other nicknames associated with Barbados includes Bimshire. The origin is uncertain, but several theories exist. The National Cultural Foundation of Barbados says that Bim was a word commonly used by slaves and that it derives from the Igbo term Bem, from Bimu meaning my home, kindred, kind. The Igbo phoneme /e/ in the Igbo orthography is very close to. The name could have arisen due to the relatively large percentage of enslaved Igbo people from modern-day southeastern Nigeria arriving in Barbados in the 18th century. The words Bim and Bimshire are recorded in the Oxford English Dictionary and Chambers 20th Century Dictionaries. Another possible source for Bim is reported to be in the Agricultural Reporter of the 25th of April 1868, where the Reverend N. Greenidge suggested the listing of Bimshire as a county of England. Expressly named were Wiltshire, Hampshire, Berkshire, and Bimshire. Lastly, in the Daily Argosy of 1652 there is a reference to Bim as a possible corruption of Byam, the name of a royalist leader against the parliamentarians. That source suggested the followers of Byam became known as Bims, and that this became a word for all Barbadians. History. Amerindian settlement of Barbados dates to about the 4th to 7th centuries AD, by a group known as the Saladoids Barrancoid. The Arawaks from South America became dominant around 800 AD, and maintained that status until around 1200. In the 13th century, the Kalinago arrived from South America. The Spanish and Portuguese briefly claimed Barbados from the late 16th to the 17th centuries. The Arawaks are believed to have fled to neighboring islands. Apart from possibly displacing the Caribs, the Spanish and Portuguese made little impact and left the island uninhabited. Some Arawaks migrated from British Guiana in the 19th century and continue to live in Barbados. In the very early years the majority of the labour was provided by European indentured servants, mainly English, Irish, and Scottish, with enslaved Africans and enslaved Amerindian providing little of the workforce. During the Cromwellian era this included a large number of prisoners of war, vagrants and people who were illicitly kidnapped, who were forcibly transported to the island and sold as servants. These last two groups were predominantly Irish, as several thousand were infamously rounded up by English merchants and sold into servitude in Barbados and other Caribbean islands. During this period, cultivation of tobacco, cotton, ginger and indigo was thus handled primarily by European indentured labour until the start of the sugarcane industry in the 1640s and the growing reliance and importation of enslaved Africans. Persecuted persons of Jewish faith during the Inquisition also settled to Barbados. From its English settlement and as Barbados' economy grew, Barbados maintained a relatively large measure of local autonomy, first as a proprietary colony and later a crown colony. The House of Assembly began meeting in 1639. Among the island's earliest leading figures was the Anglo-Dutch Sir William Curtin. The 1780 hurricane killed over 4,000 people on Barbados. In 1854, a cholera epidemic killed over 20,000 inhabitants. At emancipation in 1833, the size of the slave population was approximately 83,000. Between 1946 and 1980, Barbados' rate of population growth was diminished by 1/3, because of emigration to Britain. Early English settlement. The settlement was established as a proprietary colony and funded by Sir William Curtin, a City of London merchant who acquired the title to Barbados and several other islands. So the first colonists were actually tenants and much of the profits of their labour returned to Curtin and his company. The first English ship, which had arrived on the 14th of May 1625, was captained by John Powell. The first settlement began on the 17th of February 1627, near what is now Holt Town, by a group led by John Powell's younger brother, Henry, consisting of 80 settlers and 10 English labourers. The latter were young indentured labourers who, according to some sources, had been abducted, effectively making them slaves. Curtin's title was transferred to James Hay, 1st Earl of Carlisle, in what was called the Great Barbados Robbery. Carlisle then chose as governor Henry Hawley, who established the House of Assembly in 1639, in an effort to appease the planters, who might otherwise have opposed his controversial appointment. In the period 1640–60, the West Indies attracted over 2/3 of the total number of English emigrants to the Americas. By 1650 there were 44,000 settlers in the West Indies, as compared to 12,000 on the Chesapeake and 23,000 in New England. Most English arrivals were indentured. After 5 years of labor, they were given freedom dues of about 10, usually in goods. Around the time of Cromwell a number of rebels and criminals were also transported there. Timothy Meads of Warwickshire was one of the rebels sent to Barbados at that time, before he received compensation for servitude of 1,000 acres of land in North Carolina in 1666. Parish registers from the 1650s show, for the white population, 4 times as many deaths as marriages. The death rate was very high. Before this, the mainstay of the infant colony's economy was the growth export of tobacco, but tobacco prices eventually fell in the 1630s, as Chesapeake production expanded. England Civil War. Around the same time, fighting during the War of the Three Kingdoms and the interregnum spilled over into Barbados and Barbadian territorial waters. The island was not involved in the war until after the execution of Charles I, when the island's government fell under the control of royalists. To try to bring the recalcitrant colony to heel, the Commonwealth Parliament passed an act on 3 October 1650 prohibiting trade between England and Barbados, and, because the island also traded with the Netherlands, further navigation acts were passed prohibiting any but English vessels trading with Dutch colonies. These acts were a precursor to the First Anglo-Dutch War. The Commonwealth of England sent an invasion force under the command of Sir George Ayscue, which arrived in October 1651. After some skirmishing, the Royalists in the House of Assembly led by Lord Willoughby surrendered. The conditions of the surrender were incorporated into the Charter of Barbados, which was signed at the Mermaids Inn, Oistins, on 17 January 1652. Sugar cane. The introduction of sugar cane from Dutch Brazil in 1640 completely transformed society and the economy. Barbados eventually had one of the world's biggest sugar industries. One group instrumental in ensuring the early success of the industry were the Sephardic Jews, who had originally been expelled from the Iberian Peninsula to end up in Dutch Brazil. As the effects of the new crop increased, so did the shift in the ethnic composition of Barbados and surrounding islands. The workable sugar plantation required a large investment and a great deal of heavy labor. At first, Dutch traders supplied the equipment, financing, and enslaved Africans, in addition to transporting most of the sugar to Europe. In 1644 the population of Barbados was estimated at 30,000, of which about 800 were of African descent, with the remainder mainly of English descent. These English smallholders were eventually bought out and the island filled up with large sugar plantations worked by enslaved Africans. By 1660 there was near parity with 27,000 blacks and 26,000 whites. By 1666, at least 12,000 white smallholders had been bought out, died, or left the island. Many of the remaining whites were increasingly poor. By 1680 there were 17 slaves for every indentured servant. By 1700, there were 15,000 free whites and 50,000 enslaved Africans. Due to the increased implementation of slave codes, which created differential treatment between Africans and the white workers and ruling planter class, the island became increasingly unattractive to poor whites. Black or slave codes were implemented in 1661, 1676, 1682, and 1688. In response to these codes, several slave rebellions were attempted or planned during this time, but none succeeded. Nevertheless, poor whites who had or acquired the means to emigrate often did so. Planters expanded their importation of enslaved Africans to cultivate sugar cane. One early advocate of slave rights in Barbados was the visiting Quaker preacher Alice Gowan in 1677, "For I am persuaded that if they whom thou callest thy slaves be upright-hearted to God, the Lord God Almighty will set them free in a way that thou knowest not. For there is none set free, but in Christ Jesus, for all other freedom will prove but a bondage." Brought to you by Wikividi Documentaries. Would you like to know more?